Hey there, folks. I know at the end of my last episode, I sort of hinted that the next one was going to be about aliens and spaceships and all that cool technological stuff. Then something else happened. Christmas happened. And around this time of year, the pressure comes in to do a story that has something to do with the holiday. Today, we're going to be talking about one such story. Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol is the tragic story and ultimate turnaround of Ebenezer Scrooge, a wealthy miser whose lifetime of caring only about money has left him careless about the lives of other people. And if you've never read the book, you already know the story from start to finish, because they keep remaking it every other time you turn your head around. The dude gets visited by three ghosts who show him his past, present, and potential future, and only when he sees the future not looking so bright for everybody if he doesn't change his ways, his attitude changes, and he's instilled with a love for life that only Christmas can bring, and one that lasts him for the remainder of his days. Like many of Dickens' novels, the story utilized the class system of the rich and the poor to tell its story. A Christmas Carol in and of itself was a commentary on the times, portraying the working class as poor yet pleasant and the rich as being hateful and stingy. Of course, when Charles Dickens was busy portraying the rich as being greedy, he didn't mean people like himself who had worked their way up the social ladder. Oh no, he was talking about the other 1%. Of course, this exaggeration of character was par the course for Dickens, seeing as caricature was one of his greatest strengths in writing. Still, the reason why this story is so popular is not just because of the themes dealing with class still feeling so relevant. It's just that around this time of year, aside from the telling of the nativity story, no story seems to capture the spirit of the season quite like this one. And that's why so many people over the years have kept alive the tradition of telling the story through the medium of film. So today, on this very special holiday-themed From Pages to Pictures, I'm dedicating the whole episode to just that. Film adaptations, from the very earliest to the most recent, in as many different forms as they come. So, prepare yourself for the history of Scrooge.
God is my witness. As God is my witness, they're not going to lick me.
Aslan is on the move.
You're a wizard, Harry.
I'm a what?
Everyone's mad here.
You guys want to go see a dead body?
As you wish.
Do you really think you have a chance against us, Mr. Cowboy?
Yippee-ki-yay, mother.
In the 1900s, at the crack of cinema's dawn, many early film studios were eager to get themselves off the ground by adapting well-known stories and myths to the young silver screen. From 1901 to 1914, there were at least 5 silent film adaptations of A Christmas Carol, one of which was produced by Thomas Edison. The one that you're seeing right now is entitled Marley's Ghost from 1901, the very earliest known adaptation. And like so many films of this era, most of it is lost. What you're seeing right now is pretty much all that's left. During this time, most movies were incredibly short, seeing as the industry was so small at the time. So in order to make sense of these movies, you had to read the book first and be familiar with the story. In the years that followed, many feature films would come, some of which are also lost to time. That said, these were the stepping stones that built the foundation of what was to come. 1935 saw the light of a new day in Christmas Carol adaptations with Scrooge, which is probably the first feature-length sound adaptation of the classic tale. Seymour Hicks, the actor playing the role of Scrooge, had previously played Scrooge on stage and in one of the silent films, so naturally he's a veteran by now. This adaptation is a solid, very by-the-book telling with only a few minor changes. For starters, it's a clever touch for the filmmakers to pull a Harvey with Jacob Marley and make it so you can only hear him. The only trouble with this version is that Scrooge's childhood is skipped over, leaving us with Scrooge's love Belle leaving him. Then again, she does remarry in this version, so it's his loss. The expressionistic touch that this movie bears makes it not only interesting to watch, but also interesting to look at. So it's safe to say I found it highly enjoyable.
Thank you.
Merely 3 years later, MGM made their own adaptation of A Christmas Carol in 1938, and boy was this one different in tone. Reginald Owen's performance as Scrooge somehow comes across as more often cheerful or less cold than the rest. Then again, that goes for the rest of the movie. There's no room for sour moments here, just make time for playing, laughing kids, and all that good stuff. It feels kind of like Oz for some reason. We get a look at Scrooge's childhood, but they purposefully skip over the time period where he got too greedy because they don't want to get you down too much. Even the scenes of Christmas Future don't get too dark. In the end, I still liked it. If you want your Christmas Carol to be happy and cheerful and nothing much else, this is an adaptation for you. In 1951, Alastair Sim took on the role of Scrooge in, what else? Scrooge. This is one of the higher rated adaptations. Sim's depiction of Scrooge is more of a fast-talking businessman with an unforgettably mean stare. If John Lithgow ever played Scrooge, I'm pretty sure it would be something like this.
Who needs Christmas anyway? I say bug humbar.
I totally walked into that one, didn't I? This adaptation seems to have a lot of added material to it. We actually get to see some of what Scrooge does as far as his money lending, more of the Cratchit family, and good God, we see Scrooge's sister dying now too? Yeah, it always happened, only now we get to see it. Indeed, it's a morbid take on the character, except now we see how that sort of tragic event has taken its toll on Scrooge. On top of that, the black and white cinematography really seems to complement this one. It's a shame some copies have colorized it. There's a lot more backstory than even Dickens wrote about. We get to see more of Scrooge's progression into an unscrupulous businessman. The only thing that hurts this adaptation is their Jacob Marley. This guy's performance is so over the top, it's almost funny.
It is doomed to wander through the world.
I mean, all the other Jacob Marleys were scary, right? Alec Guinness, Goofy, even Statler. All in all, this adaptation is actually pretty good. If you get a chance to see it, see it. It's on YouTube. By this point in history, the silver screen adaptations of A Christmas Carol had dominated the cultural perception of the story. But there was another form of medium that was also doing its own Christmas Carol adaptations as well. The tradition of adapting A Christmas Carol for television began in 1944, and over the years many known actors such as John Carradine and Vincent Price would fill certain roles of the production. Unfortunately, most of these are hard to come by, though from what I've seen, you can definitely color me impressed. Although I do find it a shame that important plot elements such as Scrooge's romance with Belle were rushed over for the sake of time. I was able to find bits and pieces of two productions that had Basil Rathbone in it. The first was in 1954 and had Basil playing the role of Jacob Marley. The second was in 1956 and has a much more interesting story.
Tonight, the Alcoa Hour proudly presents The Stingiest Man in Town.
The Stingiest Man in Town was a live telecast of the Broadway play of the same name, featuring a full cast with elaborate song and dance numbers. It was broadcast on an anthology series called the Alcoa Hour.
Brought to you by Aluminum Company of America, the world's leading producer of aluminum.
You can tell this is retro when they're advertising for that newfangled aluminum stuff. This time, Basil played the role of Scrooge. This is considered widely to be the holy grail of Christmas Carol adaptations because recordings of it were so obscure it was actually thought to be lost forever, until about a year ago. Like I said before, this is a live telecast. That means just about everything you see here is done live in a TV studio, walking from one set to the next, cutting and dissolving between cameras. So you can't slip this one up, because there's no option to go back and do another take. Inevitably, this does lead to a few goofs. Still, the usage of basic overlays and live dissolves is utilized greatly to move the story forward. It's like watching a Broadway play that got a kinescope overhaul. For what it's worth, Stingiest Man in Town is a nice little experiment and a lost art. The Stingiest Man in Town was later remade for television in 1978 as an animated special by Rankin Bass. Despite my love-hate relationship with the Rankin Bass people, I found this to be one of their better specials. Walter Matthau's grumpy old man persona proves to be a pretty good fit for Scrooge. And although the production looks cheap, there's a charm brought to it that only Rankin Bass could bring when they were at their best. Also, I'd be lying if I said the song they sing for Tiny Tim didn't jerk on my tears a little.
One little boy who cannot walk is not a broken toy. One little boy can laugh and talk and fill a home with joy.
And Walter Matthau's not much of a singer, but he does that pretty good. Also, in the now tradition of having a narrator for the story, we have voice actor Tom Bosley playing the role of B.A.H. Humbug. Get it? B.A.H. Humbug? Like, Bah Humbug? Yeah, it's lame. This character doesn't do much to move the plot forward. I'm guessing they put him in there for the kids, but he just seems to occupy space alongside Scrooge. In short, if you come across this one, you really might consider giving it a watch. Not all animated adaptations are good though. The 1969 Christmas Carol is loaded with problems. Aside from the abysmal animation, the spirits are unusually cold, even the ones that were meant to be merry, and there's just an overall tone of mean-spiritedness. Not much new is added here, except they found it pertinent to establish that Scrooge cannot sneeze because he's evil, and it takes an effort to make me not care when Tiny Tim dies. So consider that a first for me here. Definitely skip this one. Albert Finney portrayed Scrooge in the 1970 musical version of Scrooge, and this time we're getting into personal preference territory here. Chances are some of you may recall me talking about this one during the top 11 best scares of childhood list I did several years ago. Mind you, the scary moments in this don't frighten me now since I've seen much worse. I realize now though that Alec Guinness's Jacob Marley is just parroting a lot of what the previous Marleys did before him. Still, he brought a chill to my spine. There are a number of things that make this version stick out from the rest. For starters, yes, it's a musical. And one of the more memorable musical numbers actually happens in the third act when a new character, Tom Jenkins, gives the future departed Scrooge a very unusually jovial sing-off, thanking him on behalf of the town for dying.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and that's the nicest thing that anyone's ever done for me.
It's probably one of the best happy songs ever written. That is, until you realize that he's dancing on somebody's coffin. The other significant change worth mentioning is an added scene that happens right after the graveyard scene, and here's where this version sets itself apart from the rest. Typically, most Christmas Carol adaptations have the nightmare end with Scrooge seeing his name on the tombstone and declaring that he's a changed man. This one goes the extra mile of having Scrooge essentially go to hell. I say this is an advantage because typically they just have Jacob Marley warning Scrooge of his ill fate if he doesn't change. Actually seeing Scrooge get his chains fitted sends the point home even more. And I know this is a nightmare I would want to wake from. All in all, this is considered one of the best adaptations out there for a reason, and I say, go for it. In 1971, animation legend Richard Williams tossed his hat in the rink with this half-hour-long Oscar-winning short film starring, once again, Alistair Sim. This version is short, truncated, surreal, and even nightmarish at times. The advantage that the feature-length adaptations have is giving you enough time to feel for the characters, but at least the bits on Scrooge's attitude towards life are kept in and even made me feel a twinge. So, I give it its props. 1979 saw a very different adaptation with An American Christmas Carol. Henry Winkler, at the height of his career, stars as Ben Slade, a New England businessman in 1933. After repossessing a few houses on Christmas Eve, Slade has his own ghost visitations prompted by a brief reading of the Charles Dickens fable. The character that Winkler puts on screen here is more natural and less caricaturized than the typical Scrooge. It also brings an overall dullness to the picture, even though I still felt for Slade during the graveyard scene.
I'm willing to make a change. I want it to happen differently.
Still, it was a brave attempt, because it was one of the few versions to take mass liberties with the Scrooge story and show that no matter what the era, A Christmas Carol and the themes it embodies are indeed timeless. Mickey's Christmas Carol was probably the first version I ever saw, or at least the first version I ever remembered. And I think a lot of folks in my generation could say that too. Released in 1983 and clocking in at just under a half hour long, this animated adaptation casts the Disney company's most memorable characters into the Dickens story, with Scrooge McDuck obviously playing Scrooge. It's a trip to look back on this one and see names like Glenn Keane and John Lasseter in the credits. This is among the few adaptations that follows the story but doesn't follow the dialogue from the book nearly word for word. And I think that's a good thing because, as we've all seen before, that's just how the Disney charm works. It allows them to have their own characters just be their own likable selves. It's just long enough to keep the kids' attention and funny enough to keep the parents laughing too. I'll definitely be seeing this one again. 1984 saw George C. Scott in the role of everyone's favorite miser in the CBS TV movie version of A Christmas Carol. Interesting factoid about this one is that it never saw a home video release until 1995. Something about George C. Scott owning the rights to it or something like that. Also interesting is that Clive Donner, the director, had previously edited the 1951 Scrooge with Alastair Sim. The thing I really like about this one is that Scott plays the character of Scrooge as less of a ham, and brings a more sternness and militance to the character. Less Scrooge, more Daddy Warbucks. Also, the cinematography and music score are very well done, and the set designs are so exquisite you forget it's a made-for-TV movie. A noteworthy change to the story happens before the ghost of Christmas Present leaves Scrooge. Certain adaptations like the 1935 Scrooge have the present showing Scrooge happy Christmases all over the world as he did in the book. This version of the present shows Scrooge a poor family's unhappy Christmas to ease us out of the pleasant tone of the present into the grim tone of the future. A gutsy move indeed. Still, I feel like this is one of the better adaptations of the story. If you want to know how to make a solid Americanized Christmas Carol adaptation, take a look at our next entry. Scrooged, starring Bill Murray, was released in 1988 and told the story of Frank Cross, a totally reckless TV executive who's trying to put on the most expensive televised Christmas Carol adaptation ever with no consideration of how he's treating the source material, who might object to working on Christmas Eve. Basically, he doesn't care. Only after the corpse of his former boss greets him does he start to have visions of different ghosts, not while he's sleeping, but while he's going about his day. The end result is a very darkly humored re-envisioning of the story that could even be considered a spoof on A Christmas Carol. Maybe too dark for some people because critics really panned this one when it came out. Since then, though, it's found its audience, so consider it a cult classic. I almost forgot to mention a terrific side character performance by the always neurotically hilarious Bobcat Goldthwait.
Excuse me! I'm going to explode!
I don't care if Cabell Studios hasn't made a video in forever, his legend will live on. 2 years after the passing of Jim Henson, we got the release of The Muppet Christmas Carol in 1992. And after this one, they might as well have given up on doing Christmas Carol adaptations because it won't be getting much better than this. Here, the Dickens classic is given the respect it deserves, with the added antics of the Muppets doing what they do best. Michael Caine's performance as Scrooge is more sympathetic and less caricaturized in depiction. You even get the feeling here that Scrooge doesn't hate the holiday just because he's had negative experiences with it, just that he never gave himself the proper chance to explore it. I give this one high marks. Something else worth mentioning is the song When Love Is Gone, as sung by Scrooge's former love, Belle. After a poor test screening, this song was cut from the theatrical version, and then they stuck it back in when the movie came to video, where audiences came to really like it. As the film stands today, you can get it on DVD in both full screen and widescreen, but only the full screen version has this song in it. That's bogus. As a grown man who has nothing better to do, I hereby demand a director's cut widescreen edition with that song in it, and I'm not alone. Oh, and by the way, remember how I said it wasn't gonna get any better than this? grab a hard hat.